Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Idaho lost more than 2,000 farms over a 5-year period. Idaho Matters wants to know how that's impacting farmers, cities, and counties. Listen to our series on farming called Land and Legacy. Episodes available on Monday afternoons through November 17th in the Idaho Matters podcast feed.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Over a 5-year period in Idaho, more than 2,000 farms vanished, and rampant growth is encroaching on land that used to be home to agricultural communities. So who's working to protect farmers as that land disappears? Today we're looking at protecting agriculture communities as part of our Land and Legacy Farming in Idaho series. And joining us now are Chris Colson, Executive Director of the Land Trust of the Treasure Valley, Jennifer Reeby, Payette County Commissioner, and Grace Crookham-Guy with Grow Idaho. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Very well. Thanks for having us.
Yes, we're doing great. Thanks for having us here.
No problem. Chris, I'm going to jump in and start with you. What is the Land Trust of the Treasure Valley?
The Land Trust is a kind of traditional land conservation organization. In the context of agriculture, we work with private landowners to conserve their farms and ranches in perpetuity by holding their development rights.
Well, that was pretty straightforward. Why do you focus on things like farmland protection?
I guess it's kind of a longer story. The history of the Land Trust was more focused in the foothills outside of Boise since its inception. And that was what was being driven by our support base. But while we were looking north, in the meantime, we started seeing alarming rates of farm and ranch conversion into development. And we kind of took a pivot and turned around and looked and decided someone needed to step into that space and start providing options for landowners that didn't want to sell their farms and ranches.
And do you see that a lot? Obviously you talk to a lot of landowners.
We do. There's certainly a lot of interest. As previous segments have alluded to, money talks, and so the value of land is at an unprecedented level in the Treasure Valley, and so oftentimes our challenge is finding ways to make the money work for those producers so they can continue farming and ranching, and aren't forced to look to development to fund their retirement. To be frank.
Yeah. I mean, you could make a lot of money selling off, a chunk of land when it's next to something that's growing, a big growing community, and then you're on your way and you don't have to worry about it anymore. But that takes the land out of agricultural production, right?
It does. They lose their farm and ranch. Their family loses the farm and ranch. They may be set up financially, but their way of life is going to change forever. You don't see a lot of apartments come back out of apartments to farm ground.
Not very many. Grace, protecting farms is a big part of what Grow Idaho does. Talk about what your group works on.
Yeah, we started Grow Idaho because we felt it was really important for Idahoans to tell their story. And people talk to us because they trust us. We have ag backgrounds, we're local, and we share the same concerns. Many of us and many farmers that are struggling are legacy farmers, and they know how special our state is and how special farm and ranch land is, especially when you consider the seed industry, the soil, the diversity of production that you can do in Idaho. Grow Idaho also doesn't answer to outside entities or organization. We're homegrown. We focus on the people here that need help, and that's really important to us. So continuing with that, we have two main paths that we focus on. The first is giving Idaho farmers and ranchers, just producers in general, the opportunity to tell their story, as well as, this is our second path, asking for transparency from our state and local governments on their plans to protect farmland.
Gotcha. And Jennifer, you're a county commissioner. You're dealing with land issues all the time. It's a big part of what a commissioner does.
Yes, I'm one of 3 county commissioners, and we are the ultimate decision makers on any major land use changes, rezones, and changes in the comprehensive plan. So I came to being a commissioner by way of planning and zoning. I spent about 15 years on our planning and zoning commission, and this topic of protecting ag ground is really what got me on planning and zoning in the first place. It's a major motivation for me. And we were told that protecting ag ground in our county was of utmost importance to our citizens. We did a survey of the citizens before we revised our comprehensive plan, and overwhelmingly, that's what people want. They wanted to limit the growth out in the agricultural areas and see the growth happen around the cities. And so as a result of that, protecting agriculture is really the number one priority in our comprehensive plan.
And it's a balancing act, right? I mean,
Oh, always. And as Chris said, it's difficult because you have willing buyers and willing sellers that want to develop land. But we set designated areas in our comprehensive plan and our zoning map for where growth should occur, and we respect that. We very rarely diverge from what that plan tells us to do.
well, how important is that plan? I mean, if we're gonna try and protect agricultural communities, you do have to plan long term. You do have to have those comprehensive plans.
You do. And there are areas that are designated or envisioned for long-term growth, but it doesn't mean that that's where the growth is now. So it's a combination of long-term planning and zoning to tell you what should go in different places. And the agricultural zone needs to be treated like a zone. It's a large area. Whereas I think some people say, well, as long as you're not developing the prime agricultural ground, why can't we build houses over here where it's dry? And our perspective is that a zone is a zone and you have to protect the whole area. So it's that sort of large area vision while also making it possible for people to develop where development is appropriate and hoping to drive the growth to the cities where there are city services, and it's really more of a growth area already. So it's protecting it where it needs to be protected and promoting growth where growth should go.
I think I'm hearing from all three of you that this is not only an important issue, but an important, I don't want to say problem, but maybe so, a concern that this is happening in Idaho. And I know you're all working to try and figure out a way for cities and counties and cities and ag land to work together as we go forward. But I want to maybe dig a little deeper into the actual problem. And I think, Chris, you kind of highlighted it there. That's one of the issues is, you've got that opportunity to sell the land to a big buyer. And Grace and Jennifer, you said the same thing. You've got willing sellers, willing buyers. So how do you get around that? Maybe my question is, Chris, give us an example. You don't have to give any names or places or anything, but give us some examples of how this is happening in parts of Idaho.
Sure, I'll lead into it. I want to circle back a little bit with something Jennifer said. It's important in the West to recognize that agriculture really drove where the initial locations of town sites were, right? That the towns grew up around where the agriculture was because of water delivery and fertile soils and things like that. And so the real crossroads here is that from a planning level, you're wanting to keep all your development around the cities and the town sites, but that also happens to be your most valuable farm ground, your most productive farm ground. And so it's super challenging. So when we're working with folks, we are Idaho, so we want to recognize, people's personal property rights. And so we're working with willing sellers on an individual level, on a voluntary basis that want to sell their development rights. And we work within a farm bill program to purchase those development rights. And then we hold them in perpetuity in a traditional land trust format. They get paid for that, but when they hear the number from the developers, the Farm Bill program pays half of the value of their development rights,
Mm,
and that's it.
mm.
And so the development rights are only one portion of that full fair market value. And so once producers who are looking down the barrel at retirement or how to involve their family, and they see the first number, when we come back with our obviously less than preferred lower number, it's really challenging to incorporate that into their planning, their successional planning. Now, one thing I'll say is the state of Idaho does not have a land conservation program, and so the intention of the Farm Bill program was they would pay half of the value with the expectation or the hope, perhaps, that the states would make up the second half of the value. In Idaho, since we don't have a program like that, um, Idaho farmers and ranchers are only getting half of what perhaps neighboring states might be able to get, and so that's a hurdle that we're looking to overcome at a state level. And I think the final part is, we see the annual conversion and loss of farm and ranch land where, tens of thousands of acres a year in some cases, and it may take us a year or two at a minimum to close 400 acres of an easement on a farm or ranch to put an easement on the ground. So, we're not really keeping up with the loss, but we are providing an opportunity for these farmers and ranchers you know, to hold those development rights aside, hold on to their farm and ranch. Demand will drive farm bill funding, and I guess that's where we're at.
Jennifer, I understand you've been looking at places in America that have been protecting their farmland for years and trying to do this and find this balance. Do you have some examples you can give us?
When I was on planning and zoning, I asked myself, this is a hard problem to tackle. So I wonder how other places are doing this. And so I made a point of looking at some other places. And when I would travel, I would go and visit with their planning departments. And so there were three that I looked at that were very different models. One was Wisconsin at both the state level and the township level, where they have statewide restrictions on growth by parcel size, and they offer incentives to landowners, income tax credits in order to commit to staying in farming for a time horizon. I think it was 15 years. So that was a statewide program that they felt really had the greatest effect. But they also had some purchase of development right programs at the local level. And so I also looked at Chester County, Pennsylvania. They had a bond that they put out to the voters, and it was approved with 80% of the vote for a $50 million bond in order to protect open space and agriculture. So that was a completely different model, but one that has worked and has been very durable in that area. And finally, I looked at a county in Maryland, which used a transfer of development right program to save over 90,000 acres in a very, very urban area. So these were, and that is a transfer development right is a mechanism that allows individual landowners to sell the development right from one parcel to a developer, perhaps in another area. And it allows the building right to be decoupled from that land. So it was three very different mechanisms to achieve a similar result, but it really depends on the particular jurisdiction, what the local land use are in that area. So what works in one place may not work in another. And one more example I'll bring up is right across the Snake River from us, where the state of Oregon has very restrictive land use laws, and it's quite hard to get a development right to put a house on a farm parcel. So just the simple difference in approach from Oregon and Idaho looks very different. And you can see it when you're driving around. If you cross a bridge, and it just looks very different over in Oregon. Now, that's an approach that probably wouldn't go over well in here in Idaho. I think we value private property and individual decision makers and don't take kindly to the state telling us what we can and can't do on a local level. So it really depends on the particular area and political culture and local land use laws as to what might work.
Wow. When you're talking about all these different ideas from all these different places on ways to preserve farmland to help keep agricultural land ag. And so I'm curious. You said there's no one solution and different solutions for different places. What about Idaho? What are the possible solutions that maybe people are looking at in Idaho, or could we be looking at in Idaho?
Well, I'll say first off, the very best way to preserve agriculture is for farming to be economically viable and productive. I think most farmers want to stay farming as long as they can, as long as they're successful and they're able to make a living. And so that's number one, is to support the agricultural economy where we can. Second, I'd say even within Idaho, it is surprising how differently different counties do things. The land use, we're all operating under the umbrella of the Local Land Use Planning Act, but within counties, the ordinances are different and mechanisms are different. So for example, in our county, we have a transfer of development right ordinance that we've had in place since the 80s, which is that mechanism whereby one landowner can, if he or she has a single building right, they can sell that building right to somebody that's in an area that's designated for growth. So it's a way that incentivizes both the landowner and the recipient of in another parcel that maybe doesn't have a building right that wants to build. So that's a way that we try to accomplish that on a parcel by parcel basis, but a lot of it really comes back to zoning. And so I think if your zoning laws are good and favorable to ag and protective of agriculture, that can go a long way. But again, zoning is a local issue. It's depends on the county commissioners that are in office, and so it's not as permanent as something like conservation easements.
I'll chime in right there just because of tomorrow is election day and local elections drive local land use planning. So if this is a topic of concern for you, I urge you to do some homework and show up at the polls tomorrow.
I would also like to chime in. One thing that Grow Idaho does as well is focus at legislation that's being passed in Idaho. And we kind of take obviously a keen focus on land policy planning and farmland protection. And at the state level, you have bills like the Idaho Right to Farm bill, which is used as kind of a silver bullet by growth interests to say, well, farmers are protected because of our right to farm bill. But in reality, it's largely ineffective. A study was done where only 41% of sole propriety farmers win the right to farm lawsuits. And so I don't have the perfect answer to that, but there are bills like that where I think it's pretty important that we reconvene and look at making amendments and augmentations to legislation that is not working for farmers.
Well, and go ahead.
Sorry, I'd also like to make a plug for public involvement. This is the kind of issue that people really care about, and counties need to hear that. They need to recognize how strongly people feel about it and build those protections into the local ordinances and the decisions that are made.
Well, Jennifer, as a commissioner, are you more apt to find out about things that are going on and things that are working if people are coming to you from your constituency?
Sure. Yeah. We and I think we as a commissioner, and we felt in planning and zone, you do have to distinguish between a not in my backyard perspective versus an overall vision of growth, where growth should happen, and the sort of planning approach that it takes to make good decisions. But yes, I think we try to be responsive. I think we are responsive to the constituents. So yes.
And I think one of the things I heard was, and I want to direct this to you, Grace, because you're talking to farmers all the time. And one of the ways to keep farmland is to make sure that farmers can make a profit farming. And that's not easy to do these days.
Yeah, it's not easy. And we were actually just kind of talking about this on the break, and we talked about it a little bit before, but we were talking about the importance of incentives. And I think where this conversation can get really like conflict ridden is when we start talking about restrictions. And Jennifer kind of mentioned the like political climate and values that Idahoans may have about their private property. And when we start talking about restrictions, which I'm not going to say are like they are important, but they are not the only aspect to this conversation. Incentives are also important. And we have groups of young farmers that want to keep farming that struggle to even get into it or connect with older farmers that could for like succession planning. So there's lots of solutions to be had that can incentivize young people, connect young people with older farmers, incentivize older farmers to keep doing what they're doing. And like Chris said, have like continuing their development rights, so that they have maybe a more secure retirement plan. I guess that's kind of something that I would like to focus on a little more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Chris, you were talking about that, about how, you're trying to do with the land trust. Basically, you're able to help small bits at a time. And I think what Jennifer is saying is, if you get zoning involved and you get planning involved, you can maybe protect larger bits. But there's no one size fits all solution, is what I'm hearing.
No, I'd say there's not. And it really changes by the producer, the individual producer. I think on your second episode, Brett referenced, successional planning so that there's a plan. A lot of what we see is it's not the successful farmer or rancher who's just deciding, you know what, I think I just like to spend my life on a boat and get out of this, right? It's generally happening when you have the patriarch, the matriarch, they're looking to retire. Their kid, they either don't have kids or the kids don't want to get into it, and so they need a way to retire. And they're, the perhaps dirty slogan we use is they're land rich and pocket poor, right? And so they're looking for that pulse to make it happen. And so it's there's going to take a variety of things that can be at their disposal that that fits each individual producer. And the more different options we have, again, not restricted options, but incentivized options, the more we're going to be able to meet them and satisfy what they're looking for. And that should result in more ag ground kept on the ground.
Well, in some instances, like restriction is, it can be quite necessary. Like, so for instance, you have a lot of the counties are actually redrawing their area of impact lines, right? And this is effectively, to summarize it, this is where cities are expected to expand in growth. And these lines they just draw that outside the city boundary, and then it's up to the city to decide how to use that land. And as they're redrawing these boundaries, having restrictions on how far that line goes out can be really important for farmers right now. So it is both this like, it's not a one size fits all solution, having incentives for farmers to keep going and also having current restrictions so they can keep their head above water for the next 5 years, which is when those boundaries are reconsidered. All of these things are things that we have to keep in mind with farmland protection.
I've got just over a minute left. And Jennifer, I want to ask you this question. Are you hopeful that farmland can be protected, maybe even grow in Idaho, given all the demands that you see on the land?
I'm an optimist, so I'm always hopeful. But yeah, it's a tough problem. But and it's not. We're not going to stop growth. I don't think anybody wants to stop growth. But the idea is to come up with mechanisms to hopefully keep that land in production long term and incentivize people to stay farming and put the growth where it needs to go. So yes, I'm hopeful.
Wow. We've been speaking with Chris Colson, Executive Director of the Land Trust of the Treasure Valley, Jennifer Reeby, Payette County Commissioner, and Grace Crookham-Guy with Grow Idaho. And I want to thank all the three of you for being here today. This has been a great discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
It's part of our Land and Legacy series. We've been looking at who advocates for farmers as more and more agricultural land has been disappearing. You can find our entire Land and Legacy series so far at our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. And you can always email us your farming story. Just go to idahomatters@boisestate.edu.
I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.